Chapter 2. Mathias yanked open the driver's side door of his Tacoma. He stowed the evidence bags, hard drive, and camera in the plastic bins he had installed in the extended cab where the back seat used to be. Then he stripped off his latex gloves with a snap and climbed behind the wheel. The demon thrashed, tearing furrows in his self-control, taking a perverse joy in Mathias's state of mind. He wrapped his hands around the steering wheel and laid his forehead against them. The back of his throat burned with the craving for hot blood. He'd fed last week. The urge shouldn't be this strong. What was wrong with him? Images overlaid his thoughts like a silent film. Victoria smiling as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. Laughter in her eyes as she pulled him up the hill to sit beneath their favorite ash tree. Her head on his shoulder while the sun painted the horizon in red and gold. The perfect moment. The images flickered, sputtered, and tore. Crimson light oozed down the leaves above him, the foliage turning gray and brittle. What was happening? He turned to Victoria, and his vision tunneled. She lay limp in his arms. The color leached from her face, sweet blood seeping into the decaying leaves beneath her. He shook her, and she flopped like a rag doll, her hair draped across her face. He pushed it aside to reveal lifeless porcelain skin. Victoria, no. His world had lost all color. Mathias jolted upright. He slammed a fist against the side window. The glass exploded outward, rattling onto the pavement. A chorus of gasps and awkward giggles came from a group of teens walking in front of his truck. Eyes wide, they scurried away, tossing glances at him over their shoulders. He groaned and dropped his head back against the headrest. The memories tortured him. If only he could tear them out, bury them, forget he had ever been human. A sharp twinge shot through his chest. She was the reason he hunted down the scum of the earth. He would honor his vow, no matter the cost. Hands shaking, Mathias jammed his keys into the ignition. The skin on his knuckles felt stiff and he flexed his hand. The scrapes from the broken glass had already healed, leaving dried blood behind. Foolishness, letting his emotions get the better of him like that. Now he had to get the window fixed. But first he needed to deliver the evidence to the station. The sooner he found the culprit, the sooner he could escape these constant reminders of Victoria. The parking lot stood empty of police cars, reporters, and curious onlookers. How long had he been sitting in his truck? Gomez would be livid. Mathias sped away from the private school through the quiet streets of the upscale neighborhood. Gabled roofs and manicured lawns gave way to stained concrete and multi-level apartment buildings. Traffic closed in, the rumble and exhaust of the surrounding vehicles invading his truck through the shattered side window. The police station emerged from behind a historic red brick hotel, American flag hanging limp from its pole in the humid heat. Mathias squeezed into the crowded back parking lot. He slid from the truck, retrieved the evidence, and headed into the 3-story brick building at a jog. The familiar musty scent of the station closed around him. He slowed his pace, removed his sunglasses, and took a deep breath. A dim, narrow hall floored in burgundy and black ceramic tile stretched before him. Carved trim, the aged wood notched, edged the heavy doors. Conversations and the clack of keyboards floated from transom windows. This was no modern police station, with their chaotic open designs and desks scattered everywhere. It had been constructed in the early 1900s, back when people took pride in architecture, back when he had been human. The door to the chief's office hung ajar. A strident voice echoed into the hallway, shattering the quiet hum of activity.
Don't tell me to be patient. I've been waiting in this dump for 20 minutes.
Mathias hunched his shoulders. Even the demon shuddered. Jessica Waterman stormed into the corridor and drew up short.
Where have you been?
She placed her hands on her hips, pressing her lips together so tightly they almost disappeared. My apologies, ma'am. I
don't want to hear it.
She snatched the hard drive from his hand.
I should have brought this myself. If you can't take this more seriously, you're off this case. Do you hear me?
Her stilettos ticked against the tile as she returned to the chief's office. Her voice drifted back to Mathias.
Play this now. I have more important things to do. I can't be stuck here all afternoon.
Mathias raised an eyebrow. More important than helping on her daughter's case? The way her blood smelled made more sense by the minute. He followed her into the office and slipped through the press of bodies to stand against the back wall. Detective Gomez scowled at him. Great, he'd get an earful when the civilians were gone. Police Chief Scott Walker held the hard drive in one hand, fumbling in his desk drawer with the other. Waterman hovered beside him, arms folded and foot tapping. The demon writhed, straining to reach the vile woman.
What do you mean you don't have an adapter?
Jonathan Rush crowded in behind the desk, seized the drive from the chief and squinted at the ports. He snapped his fingers toward the back corner of the office.
Karen, tablet now.
The drab assistant ducked her head and scampered toward the desk, her tablet outstretched. As she pushed past Mathias, he caught a whiff of her sweet blood before the stench of Rush and his boss overwhelmed it. The poor woman. She didn't belong with these fiends. Rush rolled his eyes and sighed.
And the video cable. Don't be stupid, Karen. You never think.
Sorry, Mr. Rush.
Karen's voice squeaked. She pawed through the satchel hanging from her shoulder and thrust a short black cord at him. Rush snapped everything together, muttering under his breath. Mathias caught the words.
Vice President. Shouldn't have to spoon-feed everyone.
The tablet's screen blinked on, displaying a static image of the boarding school parking lot. Walker eased the tablet out of Rush's grip. He slid his finger along the bottom of the screen.
Gomez, what time was she abducted?
Detective Gomez flipped through his notes.
Around 1:45 p.m., sir.
Walker moved the time slider beneath the video to the right. Mathias pressed closer, straining to see over the heads blocking his line of sight. The reek of blood closed around him. He sucked air through his teeth, jaw tight. The CEO stood inches from him, her tight bun revealing the smooth expanse of her neck. How many lives had she ruined by being her abhorrent self? Shadows nibbled at the edge of his vision. The demon hissed encouragement.
There.
Waterman's voice rang through the quiet office. Mathias flinched, a quiet growl escaping his throat. He took a step back, his breathing shallow and rapid. His scalp tingled. Every pair of eyes were focused on the screen, all but Karen's. She stared at him, her expression startled. Had she seen anything? He flicked his tongue along the ridges of his teeth. His fangs hadn't descended. She probably thought he was a nut, snarling and twitching like that.
That's Mark Jerome's car. I'd recognize it anywhere.
Waterman raised her voice, though no one was competing with her.
Zoom in on the plate. You'll need that for proof.
She shifted aside to reveal a black SUV frozen on the screen. It was an older model Ford Explorer, likely one of dozens in the city. The chance of her identifying the correct owner from that grainy picture was tiny.
Mark Jerome?
Gomez pulled out his pen.
Does he work for you?
Waterman snorted.
Hardly. He's the head of the local labor union.
Walker sat the tablet on the corner of his desk and sank into his chair.
Do you know of any reason he'd kidnap your daughter?
Our subsidiaries have had a few layoffs.
Rush made a dismissive gesture.
It's the economy's fault, not Waterman Inc.'s, but unions are full of riffraff who don't understand basic economics. Jerome organized a bunch of protests. I'm sure some of the threatening letters Miss Waterman received came from him.
Gomez turned to Waterman.
What makes you think they came from Jerome?
The letters referenced the union. Mark Jerome's name is on the list of enemies I had Karen send you if you'd bothered to read it.
Waterman disconnected the hard drive. She thrust the tablet and cord at Karen.
It's all part of the job, Detective. You don't get where I am without angering a few deadbeats.
She turned to leave, and Mathias moved to block her path. What if the SUV doesn't belong to Jerome? He kept his voice level. Waterman pierced him with an acid glare, but he held her gaze. Since the chief and detective were pandering to her, someone needed to ask the obvious question.
Of course it belongs to him. I've seen Jerome's car dozens of times, parked in the middle of union rabble-rousers outside my offices.
Mathias shook his head. You could be wrong. Can you think of anyone else who might be responsible for this? Seconds ticked past as they faced each other. The chair creaked and Walker rose to his feet behind Waterman.
Hawthorne.
The chief spoke at the same time as the CEO, who snapped an answer.
Everyone! Does that help?
Mathias shrugged. Not particularly.
My ex-husband, my neighbors, my employees. Everyone.
She enunciated the final word.
The only person I trust is me.
She poked a manicured nail into Mathias's chest.
Do your job. Follow the lead right in front of you. Find Victoria, arrest Jerome, and don't challenge me again.
She looked around the office.
Any of you. Chief Walker, I expect you to notify me personally as soon as you find something. Karen, give him my card.
She brushed past Mathias, Rush on her heels. Karen fumbled with a stack of business cards and handed one to the chief. A second fluttered onto the chair in front of the desk. Not seeming to notice, she hurried after her boss. Mathias muttered a few choice words under his breath.
Hawthorne,
Walker leaned against the desk on his fists.
that was uncalled for. You will not disrespect anyone who comes through my office, no matter how unpleasant they are.
Yes, sir. The words came out more clipped than he intended. The demon paced in his mind, snarling at the loss of its prey.
You disagree?
Walker's voice was hard. Mathias lifted his chin. She threw accusations around with no proof, sir. We don't know that vehicle belongs to Jerome.
Yeah, we do.
Gomez held up his smartphone.
We got a hit on the plate. Mark Jerome, 212 Piedmont, Fellman, Maine. Miss Waterman was right.
The two men stared at Mathias in silence. Heat crawled up the back of his neck. He tossed a hand in the air. Okay, so I screwed up.
Again.
Gomez pointed to the clock on the wall.
You were 20 minutes late getting back.
Here it came. Mathias rolled his eyes. I got caught in traffic.
But none of us did?
Mathias shrugged. Gomez ran a hand through his hair.
Look, Hawthorne, you're a good CSI, but you've got no excuse to leave us hanging like that. You made the whole team look bad.
Fire ignited low in Mathias's chest. He crossed his arms. Team? Gomez didn't know the meaning of the word. The demon crouched, snarling, its attention on Gomez, and Mathias forced his muscles to unclench. Being a vampire meant he wasn't one of the good guys either. Working with the cops made it easier to track down criminals to slake the demon's thirst. But if he ever lost control... Gomez's intense gaze never left Mathias. When Mathias's arms dropped to his sides, the detective sniffed and nodded once. Turning to the chief, Gomez tucked his phone into his shirt pocket.
I'm going to dig into this Jerome. I'll check back later.
He strode from the office. Walker crossed the room to shut the door after the detective. The scent of the chief's blood, sweet and pure, swirled through the air. Walker was such an oddity. How did someone work in law enforcement for so many years and avoid at least some tainted blood?
Sit down, Matt.
Walker gestured to the chair in front of his desk. He settled into his own seat, leaned back and crossed his legs. What now? Mathias plucked the wayward business card from the chair, tucked it into his pocket, and slouched into the hard seat. He needed to log the evidence into storage, run some tests, do something to track down this kidnapper. The demon rumbled with impatience. It didn't want to be here either.
I don't like the way you handled Miss Waterman, but you're right.
Mathias lifted his head. Sir? Walker tapped a knuckle against his lower lip.
Something feels odd about that kidnapping scene. This guy snatches a girl in broad daylight in front of an exclusive school with obvious cameras. He makes no attempt to disguise his vehicle or conceal the license plate. Wouldn't he take a little more care not to be caught?
Mathias chewed the inside of his cheek. Walker had a point. What are you thinking, Chief?
It could be nothing. Maybe Jerome is inexperienced, or a hothead, or he didn't think it through.
He handed Mathias the hard drive.
Check the footage, and process the rest of the evidence as soon as you can.
Mathias stood. Yes, sir. I'll let you know what I find.